This doesn't represent very well on the screen, but it's call me old-fashioned, but I still prefer the original poker playing dogs. You ever seen the black felt picture of the dogs playing poker? Now they're playing video poker. Talk real quickly about youth. Again, as I said before, an increasing majority of youth gamble. It's now normative for youth. Another a terrifying way to say it, but it's true. If your kid doesn't gamble, he's abnormal. And abnormal is a loaded term. It's more accurate to say that he's not in the norm. But think about that. And that's certainly changed since I was a kid. Because this is the first generation of kids to grow up with legalized gambling that was so highly promoted, so widely available on cable TV, so accessible now. You know, over the last 20 years, we've gone from 2 states having casinos and 10 states having lotteries to 47 states, 46 states having lotteries, 47 states having charitable gambling, you know, casinos in at least 30 states, the internet now. So I mean, you know, gambling's really, again, changed a lot for these kids. And it's not just that it's now available in where I live in Florida and Virginia, it's good. It's good for education. My own state government is telling me to play the lottery so I can support my kids at school. And that's a message you don't hear. I mean, you don't, you know, you gotta admire them a little bit for their candor. I mean, it's almost like saying, please smoke a lot because we make a lot from tobacco taxes. You you drink your hearts out, because that's going to help veterans or seniors or whatever it does. You know, in the lottery, it's one of the only state monopolies on addiction. And not surprisingly, some state lotteries have been very resistant to addressing the social downsides. You know, it's all about maximizing that revenue for these states that are in budget deficits, and it's less about minimizing the social costs. There's been some lotteries that have been progressive, and there's some good lessons, but you know, by and large, you've got some difficulties. We also look at, when you look at youth gambling, you want to look at what the parents are doing. And obviously kids model on the parents. If the rate of parental participation is 65% the past year, it's no surprise that there's a ton of kids that are thinking this is something that's good, that's okay. And again, it's a little bit like the mixed messages we send with alcohol. We know that nowadays there's a lot of parental gambling with children. We see this a lot. I guess the best way to say this, for those of you that have school-age kids, I get calls all the time from the PTAs saying, can you help us put on a casino night? So this is the National Council on Problem Gambling. I think that's what we do. But let me talk to you a little about it further. And I said, well, yeah, okay, maybe you can give us some responsible gambling material, because there's nothing that keeps my son in on Saturday nights. But I bring him down with his friends in the basement. We've got the poker table set up, and there's some, there's some food and chips and things. And we say, okay, if you want to do that, that's fine. If you want to have an after-prom party, that's a casino night because it's going to keep all the kids there. If gambling is so exciting that it's going to keep them away from sex, drugs, and rock and roll, maybe you want to think that could be addictive as well. Because I know when I was a kid, there was nothing that would have kept me from running around with my friends like that. So it can have a really powerful appeal for kids, but there's often a tremendous amount of parental endorsement. Whether it's sitting and watching ESPN with dad and talking about the line, whether it's reading in your paper. It's the first thing dad does on Sunday mornings, looks at the NFL lines, maybe watches a couple shows. Maybe your uncle took you to the track. Maybe it's a family tradition to provide a lottery ticket for Christmas. In fact, many lotteries now have special Christmas themed tickets. And you can actually buy lottery tickets with a card that's already got the lottery ticket tucked in. There's a huge holiday campaign now, so suffice to say, there's a lot of parental endorsement. And again, if you're going to teach your kid about responsible gambling, if you're going to have that conversation, that's great, have that conversation. But just be aware that there's a lot of people that aren't having that conversation because they're not so sure it's a public health problem. The parents that would never think of giving their kids a 12-pack of beer for Christmas have no problem buying $50 worth of lottery tickets and scratching them off together. And they don't see the same issues of addiction. One of the reasons we keep hammering this home, and I think this is, we're not trying to scare anybody straight, but when you look at the involvement of addictive behaviors that we are concerned about, alcohol, drugs, tobacco, and gambling, gambling. Sorry. She's there. It's just exactly. Yeah. I grew up in Atlanta, so I can say gambling. In Virginia, hey, Capital Confederacy, we're close. You look at the behaviors by grade, 7th, 9th, 11th, that's total use and then weekly use. Gambling is the highest in every grade for every behavior. I suspect many of you would not have guessed that before today. And the good news is, much of the prevention messages, much of the education messages, much of the things that we're already saying to kids about avoiding risky behaviors and promoting healthy behaviors can apply to gambling. You just got to add it in there. You know, and you have to, you know, you've got to tweak it a little bit because gambling is so popular and prevalent. But by and large, again, whether it's because we've massively driven down rates of the other bad stuff and they've gravitated to gambling, or they're just gravitating to gambling, period, there's a significant segment of the population we're missing every year because we're not talking to kids about gambling as we talk to them about everything else. You know, obviously, people ask me, well, how do kids get money? How do kids get money to gamble? They can't possibly afford to gamble. How do they get money for drugs? Yeah, I mean, you know, if there's a will, there's a way, and especially nowadays when 1 in 4 kids, and this is an old statistic, 1 in 4 kids have credit cards before they get to college. You know, I mean, I can tell you, they'll find the credit. We also know that obviously the technical term is comorbid, but youth who gamble have do lots of other fun and exciting youth things, like unsafe sex, smoking, drinking, driving under the influence, gang fights. In fact, I believe, this is my pet theory, gambling may be the great predictor that marijuana turns out to be not so much. You know, there was a couple years ago, there was a theory that kids that start smoking pot, that was a gateway behavior for lots of other behavior. And it turned out it didn't necessarily correlate all that great. Gambling almost fits that curve perfectly. In other words, kids who gamble are so much more likely to do all this other bad stuff. It's not a perfect predictor, but it's one of the best predictors I've ever seen in the medical literature of kids who are going to go on to have other troubles with other things. And the earlier they start gambling, the more likely they are to have a gambling problem. We know that from the medical literature. The average onset for the average age that pathologic gambling started among people who've sought treatment, which is a small subset of all pathological gamblers, is 11 years old. They report, and so in other words, if you survey people in treatment for gambling problems, the average age for their first bet, especially for males, was early middle school, late elementary school. That's a first bet for money. So when we talk about youth gambling, when we talk about gambling problems, again, why are we concerned? You know, isn't this mostly just individual behavior? Well, it is, but as we know from other addictions, it's got some enormous social costs, especially as the substance that problem gamblers abuse is money. And so it tends to be, when you tend to look at some of these costs and you add this up, obviously there's a fudge factor here because many gamblers, not all, but about half of gamblers have other substance abuse or mental health issues. So this cost exercise becomes a really contentious thing within the industry. Well, you know, how much of this cost can be attributed to this person, to their gambling problem, and how much is their depression? Did depression precede gambling? You know, in other words, did they gamble to relieve depression? Or once they start gambling, then they got depressed? But when you take a very conservative figure from 1999, you look at $1,200 per pathological gambler per year, $715 per problem gambler per year. And you multiply that out, this is 2008, so 2009, you're looking at about $6.8 billion per year. And again, we believe many of these costs are preventable and treatable. And so you see some of these headlines. I don't want to focus on too much because I want to accentuate the positive. You know, if there's anything that keeps us going, that keeps me going after 13 years of doing this, it's that treatment works. So prevention works. You know, it's hard to measure, but when you can, even if it's a personal story like Roger's, it's amazingly powerful. Unfortunately, we believe that only 1% of pathological gamblers seek treatment within a given year. Flip that around, 99% of people that we estimate have a gambling problem this year will not seek formal help. Now, we've done so much better in substance use. You know, you're looking at about 20%, give or take, of substance abusers in a given year will seek treatment. And there's a lot more of it that's affordable and available. We'll talk about that in a second. Where there are states with good publicly funded programs, you've got a much higher rate of treatment seeking. They've been able to double, triple, and even quadruple the number of people that have come in to seek help. They're out there. It's just they're suffering in silence right now. They don't know where to go. This morning on the radio show, on Mark and Montiel, or Morris and Montiel show, we had a woman call in and said her cousin, $100,000 in debt, and they couldn't find anywhere to get help. They knew it was a massive problem. They were here in Alabama, they just could not find, they eventually found a psychiatrist that was able to help them understand and how to do things, but it took them a long time and a lot of money to figure that out. We also know that if you do seek help, you tend to do fairly well. In the state of Iowa, about 61% of folks that sought treatment through their public program had either abstained or significantly reduced their gambling to non-problematic levels within follow-up time. We've seen the same thing with Oregon and Nebraska and Nevada. We've just done treatment evaluations that also echo that point. The takeaway from this is that 2/3 of people that do seek help get better. That's amazing. That's an amazing statistic. That does keep us going. We know it works if you work it, to use the old GA term. I talked about the helpline a little bit, and what I'd like to do is just kind of give you a brief sense of how it works. It's like 911. I'm down here from Virginia. If I got in an accident on the way here, I would call 911 without even a second thought. I wouldn't have to think about, okay, this is Alabama, this is Montgomery County, no, wait a minute, it's Elmore County, what number do I call? We all know we call 911, no matter where we are. Well, we've set up the same system for problem gamblers. So if you call 800-522-4700 anywhere in the United States, you're going to get access to a call center that offers local help. In this case, the Florida Council provides it, and they've tried to string together a network of providers in Alabama, but as we'll talk about in the next session, there's very little available. So we have to answer all these calls as if they're crisis calls. It's a 24/7 helpline. As I said earlier, we had 270,000 calls last year. Only about 5 to 10% of them are actual crisis calls. There's a tremendous amount of, in states where we put the number on the bottom, on the back of the ticket, a vast majority of our calls from that state are, what's the winning number? Because it's a toll-free number, and so people are going to call that first. Harrah's Entertainment, which some of you may be familiar with, is the largest U.S. Casino company now, puts our helpline number in the back of their Total Reward Players Club cards. Harrah's has 45 million people in the Total Rewards program. And so even if a small fraction of those folks flip that card over and call us to find out what's on the buffet in Metropolis, Illinois, and that's going to drive some of these 270,000 calls. But we have to answer them as if they are all crisis calls. And frankly, we think there's a lot of people that do call and then chicken out. They make that call and then they're, no, sorry. But at least they've reached out. Again, this is not to belabor the point, but why we think this is a national public health issue. We're looking at, we've handled 2 million calls over the past decade. And as you'll see, it's certainly been growing. Not necessarily in lockstep with anything. Gambling participation has skyrocketed during that decade. The rate of calls, have certainly been going up. We're not really sure what that means about the rate of addiction, because as we'll talk about, there's no national studies on this. But when you do look at what's available, you look at groups like the Association of Problem Gambling Service Administrators, there's been an increase in public support for problem gambling programs. Especially as states go in and legalize or add a new form of gambling, we've been more organized. We've been able to come in and say, for gosh sake, if you're going to add another 30 casinos to your state, you think you can give us a little, little taste, a little bit of something? And again, we believe that states have an obligation, regardless of whether or not gambling is legalized. States have a public health obligation to address